Well,
For the last 2 years, Russia's economy has become crippled. For all practical purposes, right now, Russia is a gas station with a nuclear weapon. That's about it. So, I mean, to say that the president of the United States actually allowed something, the president of the United States helped cripple Russia's economy.
Intelligence chiefs due to sit down tomorrow with President-elect Donald Trump behind closed doors to brief him on Russia's actions. Here to discuss now, former Congressman Jack Kingston, who was a senior advisor to the Trump campaign, CNN political commentator Kayleigh McEnany, CNN political contributor Hillary Rosen, and Bakari Sellers, CNN political commentator. Okay, glad to have all of you on. Congressman, we just heard top intelligence leaders testify that they were more than certain, that Putin was behind the election hacking, that Russian intercepts captured officials expressing happiness with the election results. At this point, should the president-elect acknowledge that it is accurate that the Russians meddled in the election?
Well,
not that they changed the outcome, but that they meddled.
I think after his hearing tomorrow, he will make a statement, and at that point, he may say that they have confirmed that there was no result that was changed because of possible interference from them, and I think that's something that he may want to say. I talked to them. There does appear to be Russian monitoring and of our election, or at least the DNC emails, but it did not affect the election results, and I think that's probably what we're going to hear. But he's going to have a really good briefing tomorrow, and I think he's going to ask tough questions, and he's going to be given some tough answers.
Hillary, here's how Donald Trump responded, or one of his staff members, whoever tweeted, said the Democratic National Committee would not allow the FBI to study or see its computer info after it was supposedly hacked by Russia. So how and why are they so sure about hacking if they never ever requested the examination of the computer servers? What's going on? I can't believe I'm reading a tweet about something that has to be serious from the president-elect. But what's your reaction?
That's the problem with a tweet, is that it doesn't really tell the story. Indeed, the FBI didn't actually ask the DNC to see the computer, so there was no denial of access to it, because there was a vendor that the FBI has worked with repeatedly over the course of the last several years that had taken screenshots, that had done investigations, and the FBI took all of the data and material from that vendor, CrowdStrike. So this is really a red herring. I think that back to your original issue, which is, what does the country want to hear from Donald Trump after his intelligence briefing tomorrow? Yes, we want to hear that he respects the facts that the intelligence officials have brought to the American people, and doing that, I think, would provide some comfort. But Carl Bernstein actually raised the earlier bigger picture point, which is this constant sort of denial about Russia's influence and attempted influence in the U.S. I don't think is connected as much to the elections for Donald Trump. I think it's really connected to his relationship, his cloudy relationship with Putin and Russian financiers. And that's really going to be the critical thing that Americans need to hear over the next couple of weeks, is what is Donald Trump's relationship there?
Kayleigh, Carl Bernstein said that moments ago, but there are others who have said the same thing, that maybe he doesn't want to divest, maybe he is denying that Russia had an influence because somehow he is entangled with Russia, maybe owing Russia money, and so on.
I don't think that's it. Look, I think if you look at history, you see President Bush, who tried to give Russia a chance, calling them a strategic partner. That failed. Obama praised Putin in his, believe it was his kitchen. That failed. Trump's wanting to just give him a chance, as the other presidents have done, and they were proven wrong, that this is not a trustworthy ally. I think this has everything to do with the election. Donald Trump won this election.
It is unprecedented for a U.S. president to have such support for Vladimir Putin, the tyrant, and to praise Russia so much, and Julian Assange and so on.
People forget that President Obama stood in the home of Vladimir Putin and said, "I'll never forget all of the great things you have done for the Russian people." Keep in mind, this is a KGB agent who is a violent man who cannot be trusted. So I would encourage President-elect Trump to look to the past and see that Obama did not succeed here, Bush did not succeed here. Why would this be any different? Maybe he's the one who can make it work. I don't know.
Bakari, is that a fair comparison?
No. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, look, we all understand that this relationship that Donald Trump has with Vladimir Putin is a lot closer than anything Barack Obama had. It's a lot closer than anything George W. Bush had. I mean, you can go back further and further and further, and you'll see that this relationship is causing a lot of concern. I mean, I think that the trouble is not necessarily this briefing tomorrow. It's the fact that Donald Trump has chosen Vladimir Putin and Julian Assange over the President of the United States and our American intelligence agencies. And he's done that in tweets, and he's said it over and over again. So I don't know why we expect anything to change tomorrow. I actually hope that he gives the answer that Congressman Kingston actually said, that this did not influence the election, let's move on, because that will actually chip away at what Donald Trump actually touts, and that's strength. That is a very, very weak answer. And if he doesn't stand up to Russia as president of the United States, then we need somebody who will. And I guess we have to rely on the United States Congress led by John McCain and others.
But who will stand up to Russia? I mean, it's just so crazy hearing it from Democrats, because comes from, you supported President Obama, who whispered in the ear of Medvedev, I'll have more flexibility after the election, who allowed him to annex Crimea, allowed him to march into the Ukraine.
Allowed.
And did not care about the cyber attacks.
In fact, that's the biggest issue. We
Kayleigh,
actually now have sanctions against Russia because of
even
Putin's activity. So, there is no allowing here. And the point that Donald Trump has a relationship with Putin and that his family has talked about how their developments have been funded by Russian financiers, there's just too much in the past there that hasn't been answered. And Donald Trump owes the American people those answers.
Well,
for the last 2 years, Russia's economy has become crippled. For all practical purposes, right now, Russia is a gas station with a nuclear weapon. That's about it. So, I mean, to say that the president of the United States actually allowed something, the president of the United States helped cripple Russia's economy. He now has new sanctions on that. And John McCain and Lindsey Graham want to take that further. The question I have for Kayleigh and others is if the United States Congress puts a sanctions bill on the desk of the president of the United States that goes further than what Barack Obama did, will Donald Trump actually sign it? I don't have faith that he will. I don't know anybody else who has faith that he will.
I think, number one, if the U.S. Congress decides that there's evidence out there that would merit it, I think the president would be behind it. But I think he would be the first one to say, remember the famous Obama-Hillary Clinton reset of Russia. As Kayleigh said, if we can rebuild this relationship, if we can move it in a positive direction, if we can work with Russia to defeat ISIS, for example, is that not a good thing for America? Is that not a good thing for world peace? And I think that the new president should be given that opportunity. I also want to say that a lot of these questions and these allegations that we're hearing, they can be vetted through the hearing process. A lot of the people who are going to be confirmed will have some of these tough questions. It might not be.
What allegations?
Well, let's just say we've heard from Hillary and Bakari that he has a relationship with Putin. I don't know of a relationship that he has with Putin. I don't know anything about it, but perhaps those are going to be questions for some of the nominees.
You think that would be better?
So you don't know about...
Hold on. You know what? This is a good place, so we'll take a break, and then we'll discuss. We'll be right back. Okay, and we're back now with my panel. Congressman Kingston was saying a lot of these questions could be answered through hearings, you said.
Yes.
And Bakari, you were disagreeing with that?
Well, first of all, you can't have Donald Trump sit down for a congressional hearing, and we're questioning the ties that Donald Trump has to Russia. And then Congressman Kingston needed help identifying some of the ties that he has. So I wanted to lay those out. I mean, I think we need to think about people like Paul Manafort, who actually was a longtime consultant for the Russian-backed president of Ukraine,
who was an independent contractor who was fired. That one,
who was actually in Trump Tower just as recently as last month. You could talk about Carter Page, who was his foreign policy advisor, who has business ties with the state-owned petroleum company in Russia. You can actually go to Bayrock, which is
that there's some
you can actually go to Bayrock, which is a company which invested in Trump Soho, which is backed by Russian interests. So the facts are, I mean, if Donald Trump wants to show his taxes so we can actually do this deep dive, that's an old, tired song. We've been there, done that. But to sit here and say that there are no ties and you don't know anything of it, I mean, Michael Flynn was just in Moscow last week.
Based on those
Michael Flynn was in Moscow last year. He was in Moscow last year at a gala as the guest of Vladimir Putin.
Well, you know, under those standards, anybody who has anything to do with Russia, Donald Trump is supposed to stay away from, I guess. But let me say this: during the hearing process, when Mr. Tillerson's up there, or Mr. Pompeo, senators can ask them almost anything under the sun, and they can drill down on any of these questions and say, are there relationships? Do you feel uncomfortable if there are relationships? What would you do if you found out there were? I mean, the hearing processes are really tough things.
Let me restate.
But there's no
hold on, Hillary.
in that
Let me
process.
restate Bakari's question. Hillary, I promise I'll let you get in. Wouldn't the American people, the American voter, be better served by Donald Trump being more transparent about his business holdings, about his tax record, so that they will know without a doubt that there are no conflicts of interest with Russia, that he may not have favorable opinions or statements about Russia or Assange or what have you, or Putin, because there's some sort of conflict of interest or that he owes the government somehow?
You know, I think that's what the hearing process is about, but I also say that's what the last year and a half was about. It was vetting candidates on what things are most important to them. And I understand there are some people who believe the tax returns were the #1 issues. Some people think building the wall or not building the wall were the #1 issues, but the voters have made this decision already, and they've decided jobs in the economy and making America great again is their #1 issue.
But just because the
and that's
voter
why
has
he's
made
the
the
president-elect.
decision, it doesn't mean that there is not a conflict of interest that's possible. I mean, the voter could, maybe the voters, they've made their decision, maybe the voter's wrong about it. Maybe there is something hanging over Donald Trump's head.
I don't think you can look at anything that happened in the election and say the voters don't care about it. I find this conversation exhausting. I can't believe we're going to spend the next 4 years talking about how the lack of transparency from the President of the United States. And I do believe that the American people want to know that the decisions that the President is making are in the best interests of the American people and not in the best interests of his pocketbook or his cronies or anything else. And I can't believe that Jack and Kayleigh and his other supporters wouldn't ultimately like to see that as well. And if the shoe were on the other foot, let me finish.
You stated it much more eloquently than I did just
If the shoe were on the other foot, there's no question that if a Democratic president-elect were in this position, that Republicans would want to know that same level of transparency. It's simply the classy thing to do. It's the American way, and I don't want to have to argue for the next 4 years that Donald Trump ought to be an upstanding president. He just ought to be one.
Kayleigh?
But the comments of Bakari and Hillary are, quite frankly, a page ripped out of the Democratic playbook. And that is to say, if you recall, when Harry Reid stood on the Senate floor and said, Mitt Romney has paid 0 taxes. He releases his tax returns because he cowed to anything Democrats told him to do. Everything was kosher. Everything was fine. Again, the Democrats said, FBI, please look into Donald Trump's ties with Russia. The FBI did so at the urging of the Clinton campaign and the Democrats, and I'm looking at a CNN headline, FBI investigation into Trump-Russia ties yields little, by Evan Perez. So this is what Democrats do. They suggest something nefarious. We look into it. There's nothing nefarious at all. And this is another example of Democrats doing just that. There has to be something nefarious because Donald Trump wants to give Russia a chance.
That's just really a silly argument.
I know, that's actually hilarious.
I don't think it's silly. I think it's your playbook.
No one has looked into Donald Trump's anything. No one's looked into Donald Trump's anything. And I know that Congressman Kingston said this was an election about what voters wanted, and voters chose either to build the wall or tax returns. Well, the facts are voters aren't getting tax returns, and voters ain't getting the wall either. I mean, so this is where we are. We have a president who's not transparent, a president who we want to succeed so that the United States of America succeeds, but he's not even giving people a chance to encourage him to succeed.
No, I
he's
think,
not even.
frankly, this is why the Democrat Party lost. It's because you're talking about issues that folks back home who are suffering for jobs, who are paying high health care. By the way, health care costs, according to Kaiser, have gone up under Obamacare from $13,000 to $18,000 per household. That's what people are worried about. They want jobs. They want economic prosperity. They want peace. They're tired of the murder rate in Chicago. Those were the big issues of this campaign.
So take their health care away.
Take it away from them then.
Look,
Take it away from them then, Jack. Take away all the health care. Take away all the insurance. Defund Planned Parenthood.
That's political
build your wall,
hyperbole. Nobody's
and make
talking
America
about
great
taking
again.
the health care.
But don't you think national security is important to people as well?
I think it is, and having a president for the last 8 years who has not stood up to Russia, who did not stand up to ISIS, who called them a JV, who left Iraq in a disaster, who really hasn't made any progress in Afghanistan. Yes, national security is an issue, and Donald Trump is talking about rebuilding the military, rebuilding our stature around the globe, getting the coalition working again, getting the respect of smaller countries like the Philippines, for example. I think that you're going to see a big change here. So I think that the Democrats are still grasping at the issues that they think are going to delegitimize this president. And they're not issues that are important or as important to the American people.
Go ahead, Hillary.
Look, I think this is, like I said, this is exhausting to constantly be talking around the edges of what appropriate behavior is for a president of the United States. And if Democrats were doing what Donald Trump is doing, there would be outcry. I do think it is more important to talk about whether or not we're going to be taking health care away from 20 million people, whether or not we are going to actually save jobs in a real way as opposed to a kind of a corporate CEO press release way. I do think that those things matter more. On the other hand, I think that
got
when
10
Donald
seconds,
Trump
Hillary.
distracts the country with these, crazy tweets, he's deliberately trying to avoid the conversations about what's happening for everyday Americans.
That is it for
we're
us tonight. That's going to have to be the last word. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. I'll see you back here tomorrow night. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.